Hello and welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. My name is Laura Bradburn and I'm joined as always on this Friday by Tony Haggerty. How you doing, Tony?
I'm very well, Laura. Yourself?
Not too bad, not too bad. Literally seconds before we came on air, my computer decided it wasn't having it and completely shut down. So who knows? I might be here for the duration, I might not be, but you guys will have to pick up the slack if it does happen. Jim is away this week, working on his one-off show of Bend It Like Bertie this weekend in Greenock. So we are joined, as we have been before, by @CelticByNumbers on Twitter, Alan Morrison. How you doing, Alan?
Yeah, good, Laura. Good to have you back there. Me and Tony were panicking for a minute.
yeah. I know. I thought they're going to think I've just ducked out. I've had enough for today. I'm gone. But no, I can promise you, Apple computers are not as reliable as some may have you believe. But we'll crack on regardless. Before we get started, Tony, I was messaging you last night. You were at the Tommy Burns story, which I know a few people in the show have been at this week. You saw it last night. You're not an emotional man, or maybe you are, depending on what we've seen.
Well,
what did you think of the show?
I'm not an emotional man, but my goodness, that gets you right there. The second half, especially, it pulls no punches and just gives it to you straight, and just brings home the enormous sadness of Tommy dying at 51 from melanoma, and it's interspersed with his family coming up on screen, and there's a moment where they think he's beat cancer, and they are happy, and it's a wonderful play, and I would urge all Celtic supporters to go and see it. It's very poignant. There's some funny bits in it. Tommy Schumer comes across as well, and the title says it all. His love of his family, his faith in his football. It's fantastic, and a few of the ACSOM contributors have gone to see it, and they thoroughly enjoyed it. And it is a wonderful play of a life. Sadly cut short and taken too soon. But yeah, if you're a Celtic supporter, it'll get you big time. And there was people in floods of tears around us, myself and my father, and I was nearly there. I nearly cried when someone christened me Tony Tears on this the other week, because it's when I speak, sometimes I have a habit of making people cry, and it's not intentional. But if you want to cry, go and see the Tommy Burns story. I tell you what, it's it's an emotional roller coaster, and it's a wonderful drama, and you'll really enjoy it, and you will come away with great memories, fond memories, but genuine sadness as well.
Yeah, it's one of those things, Alan. I heard JP talking to Paul John yesterday. Tommy Burns is one of those figures in Scottish football history, but certainly in Celtic history, who spans the generations. Whether you remember him as a player, or as in my case, he was the manager of that first team that I fell in love with. He's in the veins of the club as it was in his, and I think anybody who goes to see anything Tommy Burns related would get touched by it.
Yeah, it does sound fantastic. I mean, I was growing up. That was the first sort of team I fell in love with. Was Provan, Burns, McLeod, McStay, midfield, Charlie Nicholas, Roy Aitken. That team was, I suppose, the team when I was a wee boy. And Tommy Burns was an integral part of that. Sometimes he'd play left back. People remember that. He used to sometimes be put in at left back, but a bit like a Callum McGregor type of player. Probably a bit more explosive maybe than Callum, and a hell of a good shot. Scored some wonderful goals, and then again, memories of him when he was working with Strachan, obviously, and absolute legend of the club. It's not a term to use lightly. But what comes through more than anything, really, when you hear about people talking about Tommy Burns, is just what a wonderful man he was, and what a lovely person he was.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nobody got a bad word to say about Tommy Burns, Alan. You don't say that about many people. It's a figure of speech, but it's genuinely, in this case, it's an adage that rings true. And you're talking about that Strachan era, that wonderful Champions League picture when he's in midair in the pylon. That's the Tommy Burns I like to remember, and the one that scored against Sporting Lisbon, and I think he scored a couple against Rangers as well, didn't he? So
aye, yeah, he
and
scored a few. Yeah,
as he said, the supporter that got lucky. I think we got lucky that we were privileged to get to see him and live out his dream.
Yeah, I saw that clip on Twitter the other day of forgive me, I was too young at the time, but it was after a cup final. I can't remember if it was Scottish or League Cup, where he was getting interviewed on the pitch, and he points at the supporters and says, "They're there and they're always there," which struck a chord with me, because as anybody who might follow me on Twitter, I tweeted something about Kyogo and Jota the other day, saying how they showed pride in being Celtic players and pride in the hero status that they've been afforded by being Celtic players. And, after the battering that we took from some at the club last season as supporters for seeming entitled and seeming, spoiled in some cases because of the way we reacted to last season, it's refreshing to see them and to remember Tommy as people who knew what an honour it was to be a Celtic footballer, to be representing the club. Thanks everybody for commenting. Facebook user, unfortunately I can't see your name because our platform needs you to give away some permissions to show your name or something, but it says, I was at the TB story last night with my daughter. Fantastic tribute to Tommy and the Burns family. So just proves again that kind of cross-generational reach that he's got. And the fact that, we're still talking about him, 15 years after his passing, and, decades after he first made an appearance for the club. So he'll always be remembered, as will any player who gives the kind of service that Tommy has to Celtic. But I'm going to try and lift the tone a little bit for the rest of the show. How am I going to do that, you might ask? Vasilas Barkas.
What?
Tony, I'll come to you.
Taxi.
Yes, Tony.
My initial taxi for Haggard Rob Barkas, whatever one you want to.
Yeah. Tony, I'll come to you first. So, as was probably expected, it's now become more concrete that there's a suggestion that Barkas is set for the exit door, either on loan or on a permanent transfer in January. That was suggested by journalist Yanis Chorionopoulos. I should have rehearsed that before I tried to say it live on air. But that journalist suggested that that's going to be the case. A couple of questions. I mean, we've gone over Barkas ad nauseum. I don't think anybody's in any doubt as to why he'll be heading for the exit door. But what are your opinions on, we've found a goalkeeper in Joe Hart that we're lauding praise on that has solved an issue for us. But there's no doubt that, if an injury happened to him or anything like that, we would be in trouble. What are you looking for from a second string goalie, given that it's got to be somebody who's happy to come in and sit on the bench initially?
First and foremost, you have sympathy for Barkas because it's just not worked. Sometimes footballers come to a club and it doesn't work. They come in for a decent outlay, which Barkas did, and it's just he's been cast in the wrong movie. I'm sure Alan will give us his stats for the actual games that he's played and stuff like that, and I can look forward to that. But you just need to look at the games that he has played, and he just hasn't impressed. And you feel for the guy because there's no hiding place when you're a goalkeeper. So I don't know. I think he played something like 13 or 14 appearances last year under Neil Lennon. Maybe Alan will be able to tell me. And he's only made one this season under Ange, and that was in the Champions League. So I think it's better for Celtic and for Barkas himself to cut their losses. And I would rather it be a permanent move somewhere rather than a loan deal. Try and get some money back on your outlay. Anything that you can get for him, and then put it towards Ange's transfer kitty for January. But in terms of another goalkeeper coming in, now there's one goalkeeper I would like, and funnily enough, he's been linked with the club across the south side of the city, Rangers, Xander Clark. But I don't think that Xander Clark would want to come and play second fiddle to Joe Hart. I think he'd want to play.
Yeah.
Sadly, because he's garnered a reputation, and he's almost in the cusp of Scotland honours. So I don't know if that would be feasible, but I think that's the standard and calibre of goalkeeper you should be looking at as a backup to Joe Hart. And because if he does get injured, then you do have a problem, because Bain and Barkas clearly can't be trusted. So you need another decent goalkeeper. Would Xander Clark come and play second fiddle? I don't think so. But my thoughts on these matters, Laura. You've got to ask a question, haven't you? Go and ask the question and see if he fancies it. And also as well, if you did get someone like Xander Clark, you could maybe rest Joe Hart, because he has played an incredible amount of football since he turned up at Celtic, and we are very reliant on him. So it's I'm talking about maybe Scottish Cup game stuff like that, that kind of thing. So that would be my immediate choice. Another goalkeeper that springs to mind is Siegrist from Dundee United, who mentioned in dispatches at Celtic. Some people seem to think that he would be decent cover or backup for Joe Hart. I am just delighted that we've actually got Joe Hart, and we're talking about somebody coming in to be a backup. It's up to Celtic, but in terms of that, I still do think that if Barkas goes on loan or out in a permanent deal, we need another good quality goalkeeper.
Yeah. Well, Fergus on YouTube, it says we need a number 2 for Hart. Bain is no good, and I think that's the point that we're making as well. It's not as if Barkas goes, we've still got Bain there, that we would be happy for him to come in. Goalkeeping has been a problem for us for a number of years. We had still remember Connor Hazard being in for that quadruple treble winning Scottish Cup final, which to this day seems as bizarre as it did at the time. Alan, it's a funny position, goalkeeper, because it's so vital to the team, and yet it's so vulnerable to injury and things like that. If he dives the wrong way, if a ball hits him wrongly and he gets a broken wrist, it's a vital part of his body that he's using to be out. So it's something that we can't afford to slack on as a second choice goalkeeper. As Tony alluded to, what are your thoughts on Barkas as he potentially leaves the club, and what we would be looking for in a second string goalkeeper?
Yep, so interesting thoughts there. So measuring goalkeeper performance using data is actually quite tricky of all the positions, because if you think, and especially especially if you think about a Celtic goalkeeper, because they will generally, on average, make around 2 saves a game. Now, that's an incredibly small sample. So, and then you think about when, if you remember, Brendan Rodgers bringing in Doris de Vries because of what a good footballer he was perceived to have been at some point with his feet. And you think, well, that's madness. I just want him to keep the ball out the net. But you think, well, you're on average making 2 saves a game, but I'm going to ask you to complete 40 passes a game. You suddenly think, well, which is more important, right? And I think it's a case of, both are important, but you have to balance them, and it's not as straightforward as just saying, oh, he makes lots of saves. Because again, if you did I lose you? Or did you?
No, you're still there. Yeah.
Oh, still there. Sorry. Yeah. So you have to balance it out. It's not just as simple as saying you make loads of saves. I mean, traditionally, when you're looking at something like Sky Sports and they're analysing goalkeepers, they always quote you save percentage as if that's at all meaningful. What it tells you is which goalkeepers have the most shots to save, not which is the best goalkeeper. But if you, but I always think there's value in all of these metrics. But and what you have to do is form a picture by piecing them all together. Now, at the moment, Celtic have got a number of goalkeepers in their squad. Okay, so Barkas, to me, is obviously expensive. It costs a lot of money. And then we've got Bain, who's probably the next senior goalkeeper. We've then got 2 23-year-old goalkeepers. Hazard, who I'm not sure what's happened with him because he's not out on loan and he's only been on the bench once. And then we've got Ross Doohan, who's out at loan in Tranmere. So he's following the Callum McGregor route of blooding himself in the lower leagues of English football, which is a tough school. And Doohan's playing in a team that's only conceded 10 goals in 15 matches. He's played 12 times. Before that, Doohan had 2 full seasons at Ayr United in the Championship, near the top of the Championship. Again, a tough school for a young kid to be playing. If you actually look at Doohan, he's 23, and although he hasn't played for Celtic, he's got 107 appearances under his belt, senior football. That's quite impressive. If you follow a chap called Lewis Laird on Twitter, Lewis does a fantastic job in reporting. He goes to all the Celtic B games, and he keeps a running report, and you can subscribe to a newsletter, and he'll give you updates on how the loan players are getting on. And as you imagine, I track all this stuff. So Lewis is doing a great job there, and doing his impressing in his time in Tranmere. So I think there's a possibility that lad could make it. And then underneath that, you've got the two sort of B goalkeepers who are Mullen, and then there's Oluwayemi, who's the England Youth International, who's actually on the bench at the weekend. So I think there's potentially a bit of talent there. But let me come back to Bain. If you actually look at the data on Bain, and remember, Bain essentially ended Craig Gordon's Celtic career. Bain broke into the team, I think it was the winter of 18-19 season, and he was there on merit. And I did a piece on him on the Celtic by Numbers site, and when you looked at it at the end of the season, he absolutely deserved to be the number one goalkeeper, and he was the number one goalkeeper on merit when Lennon took over. What then happened is that, I believe that Lennon made it very clear that he didn't fancy Bain and that he was looking for a new goalkeeper, and obviously we got Foster back for another loan season, and Bain's confidence and form absolutely collapsed at that point. He's clearly a player that needs a bit of an arm round, and is obviously a bit of a confidence player. But if you actually look back at when he has played, his numbers to me are actually quite impressive, and are actually on a par with how Joe Hart's performed. So if you look at things like so goals conceded versus goals you'd expect them to see. So the concept of expected goals. If you think about all the shots that a goalkeeper has to deal with, i.e. those that are on target, and you look at the expected goals value of all the on-target shots, and then compare that to the actual number of goals that they've conceded, that's a really good measure of, are they saving the shots you'd expect them to? And Joe Hart, the headline with him is he's broadly saving the shots and conceding the number of goals you'd expect him to, given the shots he's facing. Bain actually exceeded that metric by a little bit more. He actually overperformed and kept out more shots and more higher value chances than you'd have expected him to. Similarly, his save percentage is actually higher than Hart's. Hart's is saving 67% of shots. Bain was 72%. Bain was actually relatively low error. Now, I think Bain tended to not to play in big European matches, and I think he's probably made a couple of errors in these sort of high-profile games. Now, this is where measuring goalkeepers gets tricky, because what I think we'd all agree is that Joe Hart is excellent in these big games. His big game mentality, his ability to perform to a high level when it really matters, much like Christopher Julian actually is there. He made a huge error at the weekend, but you're sort of thinking, if you're going to make a huge error, make it 4-1 up against Dundee, not away to to Leverkusen, and you'd imagine that's how Hart would perform. And again, the other piece, the other couple of components of goalkeeping that we can measure, where Barkas was actually really strong was in coming out for crosses. He was excellent. He was easily the best goalkeeper Celtic have had in recent years, actually coming out and catching crosses. And the second thing that Barkas was really good at was his passing. His passing was excellent, 88% completion. And Bain is 80%. And it's the one area of the game that Hart's actually really surprised me, is he's come in and he's not known as being a ball-playing goalkeeper, but he's actually done really well. And then finally, the last piece of sort of the jigsaw, if you like, that I'll throw out there is passing, sort of creative passing. So passing that not just deliver the ball to the nearest player, but actually break lines and take players out of the game. That sort of pack passing, as we call it. And again, Hart and Bain are probably the two best we've had at that in the cadre of goalkeepers that we've had recently. So long story short, for me, I think Bain's more than an adequate backup. And if I had money to spend in January transfer window, I wouldn't be focusing on the goalkeeper position, especially given the volume of other goalkeepers that we've got behind that.
It's a really interesting point, Tony, and it's something that I've thought about a lot before coming on the show today. Is, there's two positions on the field for me that are dictated very often by emotion. That clash between emotion and statistics more than any other position: striker and goalkeeper. If a striker's not scoring enough goals, people think he's playing poorly, even if all his other statistics prove that he's having an impact on the team. If a goalkeeper's conceding too many goals, people think he's playing poorly, even if he ends up creating attacking chances through his distribution. So Alan raises a good point there about, statistically, Bain looks like an adequate second choice. But for me personally, seeing him between the sticks does not imbibe me with confidence. Does it you?
No, and I think a lot of Celtic supporters Bain doesn't instill confidence, which is why we're having this discussion about getting in a another quality goalkeeper. I wouldn't spend a lot of money. I agree with Alan. I mean, Bain can be a deputy, but you just don't trust him, do you? And he's had various chances to, I was going to be flippant and ask Alan, was Barkas expected save numbers and negative?
Yes. Oh yeah. I mean, they were. I mean, he's not as bad as Doris de Vries, but he was easily the next worst in that regard. And he actually only saved 51% of shots faced, which might be unlucky. He might have.
That's the warm up, Alan.
but no, Bain is honestly the other piece that I track which is a bit more subjective, is kind of errors. And again, Bain's error rate versus big saves that he makes, saves you wouldn't expect him to make. Now Hart makes a much higher volume of saves that you wouldn't expect him to make, but Bain's error rate and Hart's error rate are around about the same. I honestly, not a lot of difference in my. And that is a subjective metric, but it's a judgment. But yeah.
But Alan's stats would say that Bain can easily deputise then, can't you? That's what they draw from that, right? But when you're watching Bain as a supporter, he doesn't fill you with confidence. I don't know, Alan, does he fill you with confidence despite knowing those metrics behind him? Do you?
No, it's Laura, the points you made were absolutely spot on, right? And that perception and that trust is actually, there is a intrinsic value to that, and it is important. When I first saw Bain,
correct me if I'm wrong, Alan, but even you, when you started talking about the statistics for Bain, I think you were surprised, having looked at them, that they were as good as they were.
Yeah. My first, so you say first impressions, last a lifetime sort of thing. So my first impression when I saw Bain playing for Dundee was he looked small for a goalkeeper. That was my honest first impression. I thought you're not very big. You look too wee to be a goalkeeper. And he seemed to play smaller than he actually probably is. I don't know how big he is. I think he's probably just over 6 foot. He's not a big lad. But what impressed me about him was, as I say, that period when Rodgers made him first choice. And he was absolutely there on merit, which shows that he has got the capability. He played pretty much a full season as Celtic's number one, and it was only when Lennon came in that fell away. So to me, that's a body of work that he's put together there, playing at a certain level. And as I say, when I look back, and there's a lot of data now on Bain, he's played a reasonable number of games. To me, he's solidly he's a solidly average goalkeeper. And I don't mean that as faint praise. I mean, for a backup, I would say he's a good choice.
It's really interesting. CK on YouTube says, I love the statistical content. It's really helped the podcast up its game, and I think I totally agree. I think what Alan provides to the conversation is fantastic. On the other hand, you've got Maravchik25 on YouTube saying, I still get the fear every time a corner kick comes into Bain. So two sides of a coin there. That's
small. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, but there's a lot of other factors that play there as well when the corner comes in.
I'm sure you could go into that as well, Alan. But that statistic about Barkas only saving 51% of shots. If I'm a sports scientist or a statistical expert of any kind playing against Barkas, in that case, I'm saying take a shot, flip of a coin, and it'll go in. So it's interesting to know. But we'll certainly see what happens in the coming months. I think as well as players going out like Barkas, we're likely to see a few come in, which I'm sure we'll get to at some point. But Tony, I'm going to come to you on an interesting one. Kyogo, as is necessary for him during this international break, flew out earlier in the week to join his Japanese teammates in Vietnam for a game against Vietnam in Hanoi. I was speaking to Alan before we went on air, and what we believe is that the Japanese Football Association chartered a plane for all the European-based players to fly over to Vietnam. What ensued was they met all in Amsterdam, which is a central hub for travel, obviously, and then stopped for a fuel stop over in Russia, at which point they were stuck for 10 hours because of a problem with the fuel carrier. That led to them only getting one training session before the game against Vietnam, and then Kyogo therefore appearing on the bench and only making a 15-minute appearance in Hanoi. The reason I bring that up is, while on the face of it, it might appear a positive thing that he didn't play a lot of minutes against Vietnam, What are your thoughts about him and players like him, like Tom Rogic is another one that springs to mind, having to make these gargantuan journeys, every few weeks at this point in the season? It can't be a good thing for us, regardless of how much they play or don't play, surely.
I think if you're being selfish and you're looking at purely from a club level, you don't like it. But playing for your international or your country is the pinnacle of a player's career. And you know when you sign players from Japan and Australia, they're going to have to go on long hauls when they're called up for their country. You accept that, and that's part and parcel of, players from those nations playing at your club. You ask Kyogo if he wanted to go and represent Japan. Of course he would want to represent Japan, so it's a no-brainer. These guys want to play. Is it worth, the long haul for 15 minutes against Vietnam? Then you can argue the toss. But I don't think you can't stop players from wanting to play for their country. It is the highest honour they can get. It's your Celtic supporters, so we're looking at it from pretty narrow prism, and you want your players to not get injured, not be affected by the long hauls, flying all over the world. But what happened in Russia, you can't legislate for that either, can you?
No.
And on the flip side, you say he was only played 15 minutes, so that's not so bad. He'll come back possibly, still in good shape and good nick. But international breaks are more and more frequent now, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
Years ago, they weren't. It wasn't such a big problem, and players could go, once in a while. But it's 2 or 3 times every 2 months or 3 months now, isn't it? Internationals. I mean, it seems to be the most internationals I've seen ever crammed into a schedule. And if it's not European qualifiers, it's World Cup qualifiers, it's Oceanic group, Asian groups, and they're flying to all sorts of footballing outposts, which ideally is not great, but you have to accept that these players want to play for their country. And I'm a traditionalist that way. I'd never ever want to stop a player playing for their country. We've already came a cropper this year already with Kyogo and Callum being injured on international duty. So, I'm hopeful that Celtic have used up their bad luck in terms of players being injured on international duty this season. But you can't stop it, and I'm an advocate of it. But selfishly, you just want them not to play as much, and when they go away. But it is what it is. But stuff like fuel stoppages and 10-hour delays, you can't really legislate for that, can you?
No, I don't think you can. Pedro Mux on YouTube, pretty much agreeing with you there, says it's a risk you take when you sign a player from that side of the world. Should be part of the risk assessment or equivalent thereof when buying a player. And I think that's probably something that does happen, as well as the medical and as well as the finances and all that kind of stuff. That's part of the consideration as well, and whether the player's happy to do it, which in Kyogo and Rogic's case is obviously very clear that it is the case. Whether it might lead to them retiring early from international duty or not, I don't know. But as European-based players from those types of countries, I'm sure they think it's part and parcel of the job. Alan, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on it, because fatigue is a real thing with players travelling that distance, whether they do or don't play. Do you see it having any significant impact on us as a team, or on the individual player's performance?
Yeah, so I mean, firstly, I'm with Tony in that I'm a bit of a traditionalist. I think players should take pride in players playing for their respective countries and encourage it. But yeah, so listen, the world has obviously changed, and in some cases for the better, in terms of there's been a harmonisation of the international football calendar now. So each of the confederations have aligned their games all at the same time. So that's helped. And also the days that the teams play now is shifted from Wednesday, Saturday to be more like Thursday, Monday, which means there's more recovery days, which are crucial really for fitness and conditioning. But clearly there's a huge, if you're the coach, if you're Postecoglou, there's a huge sort of downside risk of players going onto a schedule like Kyogo's, long haul flights, and bear in mind, Kyogo will have gone to from Glasgow to Vietnam, which is not going to be direct. It's going to be almost a whole day travel. You then add in that delay. You've then got another day travel to get from Vietnam to Oman, and then you've got about 11-hour flight back from Oman to Glasgow. And long haul flights, your circadian patterns are out, you sleep disruption, you reduce your oxygen efficiency. So a lot of athletes, you measure the sort of VO2 max metric, that gets that reduces slightly when you through long haul flights. Or just physically, your limbs are stiff and you're more lethargic because of being sat down for a long time, etc. So there's, and then obviously they've got to potentially training sessions, then playing games. So there's clearly significant, exposure to that kind of injury and physical conditioning risk. But on the other hand, there's a lot of benefit. I think there is benefit. The upside is potentially, the reputation of the club, the reputation of that player, the morale of that player representing their country, the economic value, dare I say, of that player through getting international caps. So those are the sort of upsides to it. But I think ultimately, in terms of what is the impact on an individual player, it often comes down to that. It is actually the individual and what their conditioning is. So if you look at like a player like Rogic, for example, or Bitton, who's traveling a fair way to Israel. I mean, Israel's a good 8-hour flight. We know that those two players, they're big men, they're tall, they're relatively heavy framed compared to like the likes of Kyogo, and we know that they've got a relatively poor injury risk. So all of those factors being on those flights they'll have a higher risk profile in that sense. But if you look at somebody like Kyogo, small framed, very light, he looks very wiry and agile, seems to be quite a naturally fit lad like McGregor, for example, you probably less risk in terms of them spending a long time on a flight, I would have thought. So as I say, it depends on the player. I think if you look at who we've got away this week, Kyogo really will be back late Wednesday, hopefully. So he's going to have Thursday, Friday to get to recover, which is probably the minimum for Saturday kickoff. He's got most of Saturday because it's a 5 p.m. kickoff. So I think as long as his flights are not delayed again, we should be just about okay on his side. I think with Bitton, they play Monday, Israel, but they're at home to the Faroes, so hopefully they may even mix it up a bit because they may not have anything to play for as well as playing the Faroes at home. So whether Bitton gets minutes, we'll see, and Abada might get a run out. But they should be back Tuesday, really, from then, and they've got plenty of time to recover. And then the one who's got a real crunch game is Juranovic. So Juranovic is playing in Croatia against Russia on Sunday. So again, it's a huge game because basically whoever wins that game qualifies automatically, and the other has to drop into the playoffs. So, but Juranovic is playing on Sunday. So again, he should be back Monday. Should have a more or less a clear week for recovery. And obviously the Scottish boys, the two Scottish boys, McGregor and Turnbull, they'll be back in Scotland this weekend. So I'm not too. It's Kyogo's probably the biggest worry in that sense, in terms of the international break.
Yeah, Tony, what do you? Well, I'm about to, as I always do, I'm about to ask you the unanswerable question. What is the solution to this? We're talking about, as you mentioned, this is the third international break since the start of the season in August. I've heard people mention, having an international month where you play all of the qualifying games within that period of time, or 2 of those at the start and the end of the season. There's many ways to skin a cat, as they say. Do you think that's a more practical option for reducing this back and forth travel for players, or do you think it's a case of it's going to continue as is?
I think it's going to continue as is because it doesn't matter what solution you come up with, someone's not going to be happy. So if you cram a lot of games into a short period of time, still risking the same effect on injury in players, aren't you? Overplaying them and within a certain time frame. So there's no easy solution. I think, as Alan said, with all the calendars and the fixtures being aligned, that's about as best as you can come up with. At this moment in time, I believe, and long haul flights and fatigue and all that, that's just part of the process of players playing international football. But as Alan said, there are upsides to it. The players' value increases, so as Alan said, Perry should thought that you're going to sell players, but I mean that's a fact of life, and I just think that years ago international fixtures were few and far between. Now they just seem, you know what I mean? It's like, because when you look at the likes of, and I'm going a bit back here, but Jimmy Johnson got 23 caps for Scotland. So that tells you the disparity in kind of internationals. Nowadays there's internationals happening, every fortnight? Every 3 or 4 weeks? So and it shows you, and it just shows you how the planning that goes into scheduling them at certain times in order to be synchronised so that players can travel at the same time. And as Alan says, it's not so much playing the games, it's the recovery time, isn't it, Alan? It's the rest periods.
That's crucial, yeah.
That's Brendan Rodgers used to bang on about rest periods, recuperation. It's a big thing in football now, because players can cope with playing football. Unlike, provided they don't get injured. It's the recovery time after that they need, which is crucial now to players, not sustaining any niggles and things like that. So that's the big thing about it. And as Alan says there, 2 days minimum is usually pretty good, isn't it, Alan?
I think it's the minimum, yeah. I think most would say 3 would be perfect.
Yeah, but 2 minimum, 3 and above, you're fine. So these guys are fit for a reason. They've got powers of recovery as well, and they know what to do. But it is important that they get that recovery and rest periods, when they should. But what do you do with internationals? Do we, you never scrap them, or do you say to players, I think you've got a hammy, you're going to miss this one or pull out, and that's, some teams have done that in the past. I just don't think that benefits anyone if you start withdrawing your players from international duty. It's not a good look for your club, and it's not a good look at all for the player, and I'm always of the opinion, if a player's called up for international duty, no matter where it is, they have to go and represent their country, and players will always say the same. It's the highest honour that can be bestowed upon a footballer, so it's and the fixtures are just going to increase, sadly, but that's you're just going to have to deal with it, aren't you?
It's unfortunately the case, that point about pulling players out of international duty. I think you're right. I don't think it does anybody any favours, particularly if, as we believe, players still think it's an honour to represent their country. They're going to want to play at every opportunity. So, and that's before we even got into the conversation. I've not heard anything about how the Qatar World Cup next year is going to affect the domestic season. So that's a whole other situation, but one that I'm sure we'll get to in time. AJSC Tech on YouTube, thanks for commenting, says, with a 10-game qualification group, UEF should devise 2 blocks of 5 games instead of all these mad air miles. I mean, I think on the face of it, that sounds great, but the logistics of organising that for a short period of time to be played over is another. I'm sure there's reasons why that hasn't been done. And as we say, like the synchronisation of all the different federations' international group games is about as good as we can manage at the moment. But it'll be interesting to see the way it develops and changes, especially if international tournaments change. Arsene Wenger not that long ago was suggesting a World Cup every 2 years. Whether that happens or not, I don't know, but we'll wait and see. Alan, you raised an interesting point about Nir Bitton and whether he'll get minutes, and he was a player that I wanted to talk about today. I've seen some articles about him this week and some other chat among Celtic supporting friends. He's been at the club around 9 years, I think. Obviously, been there for every success we've had over the last decade. Probably around about the stage where he's going to be eligible for a testimonial of some description. And I wanted your thoughts, Alan, on... Personally, I feel like there's probably not a player who's achieved as much for Celtic on paper who is thought of less by the Celtic support than Nir Bitton. Do you think he gets an unfair rap, or do you think there's a reason for that reputation?
Yeah, I think it's obviously the main reason, I think, will be just the lack of playing time relatively over the recent seasons. It will really come down to that. But he has been at the club since he was he was signed in the 2013-14 season. he was 22 years old, and if he's 5 short of his 250th appearance for Celtic. So that's quite an achievement. He's 16 trophies. He's averaging a trophy every 15 appearances. There's probably few who are as efficient as he is, given the number of games that he's missed. But actually, what was funny was that when he joined the club in that first season, the 13-14 season, in his first few games, he got a red card in a European game after about his third appearance, and then was subjected to sort of what we call niggly injuries. And I just like set the tone for the whole of his Celtic career in some respects. He's the only one, along with Forrest, McGregor, and Rogic, that are surviving from the first season I started Celtic by Numbers, which was the 14-15 season. So I've got data for Bitton from that time on. So he's in all of my spreadsheets. I've got an affection for him, in that regard, if nothing else. I think he really broke into the team in I think it was November 2014, a Scottish Cup tie against Hearts, and then he was pretty much first choice after that. And him and Brown were Dyla's pivots. I don't know if you remember, but it seems crazy now to have a central midfield of Bitton, Brown, and Johansson. I mean, can you? Us three would be faster than that, right? It's just crazy when you think about it.
I'm confident in that, Alan. We'd be faster than them. Yeah.
But he might, he was a regular under Dyla. He had 43 appearances in Dyla's first season, 46 in 15-16 season, and that was probably his pinnacle. 46 appearances, 8 goals in the 15-16 season, and he's never made more than 19 since. So that's because he had a bad injury. So when Rodgers started, then it was him, Brown, and McGregor in midfield for the first period. And he didn't start getting used as a centre-back until his second Rodgers season. And Rodgers came up with this ruse that because he was a big lad probably, or because of his passing range, I think, I'm being a bit flippant, but I think mainly because of his passing range and because he probably didn't have the pace to dominate a midfield, wouldn't it be a good idea to put him at the back? And the thinking was kind of had its merits. This is a guy with a terrific range of passing. So if you've got him in a back three, especially, and remember Rodgers played a back three quite a lot, and Bitton in a back three kind of makes sense. You've got one of those three who's then capable of effecting a large number of through balls and line breaking passes, and he's probably going to do good enough defending. But the problem was that he really didn't. I look at some of the comments because when I capture all the data for games, I've got my own little commentary that I write just so I can remember all the key incidents and what I was thinking and the qualitative stuff. And I look at some of the comments I wrote about Bitton. There's one famous game, if you remember, when we played it in Astana, and I think we were 5-0 up, and it looked like at one point we were all going to blow it away. And Bitton played centre back, and he must have been at fault for all the goals. His body shape when people were running at him was all wrong. His positioning was wrong. He didn't react quick enough. He doesn't deal with a long ball quick enough. He just isn't built to be a defender. He's never in the right spot, and he doesn't have that sense of danger. The art of defending is making nothing happen because you're always in the right place, and it's the lack of things happening that indicate both a good system and a good defender. And that's why defending is quite difficult to track sometimes, because it's a team game, it's a system game, and also because if you're actually preventing things from happening, you're not getting crosses from your part of the field. You're not getting shots from your part of the field. You're always positioned correctly. You're avoiding danger. That's the perfect way to defend. With Bitton, you just didn't get that. You got slow reactions. You got not being in the right place, and these weaknesses tended to be highlighted. Obviously, the better opposition he played, not surprisingly, so it tended to be in the higher profile games. So then he got a bad knee injury. I think it was January 19, and that put him out for a year. He didn't play for Celtic for pretty much a year, and since then it's been fitful. He's been used as a centre back, and Lennon sort of persisted that last year. But he's continued to suffer from many different muscle injuries, a bit like happened to Mulgrew towards the end of his Celtic career and Chris Commons, where there's probably an inherent weakness, and I believe he has to manage a knee injury. But what that tends to do is it tends to lead to issues in other muscles around your leg, and I think he's in that space now where he has to carefully manage his himself and his body. But it's fascinating that Postecoglou's put him back into midfield, and I don't know whether it's we simply don't have the squad depth and there's no one else left, or whether he's genuinely Postecoglou likes him, because his first game for Postecoglou, he got sent off against Midtjylland. And a lot of managers would just say, you know what, pal, you've blown it. I can't trust you. You cannot be trusted. I'm not playing you again. But here he is, the most unlikely renaissance potentially of the season.
Yeah, it is a strange one. Tony, the reason I brought it up was because Chris Sutton was speaking to the Record Celtic podcast and said that where he has a bit of sympathy for him is that he came to the club as a central midfielder when we've all considered him a centre half, as Alan mentioned with the Astana game. I think that's where the origin of the kind of joke meme about Bitton being at centre half for the European qualifiers was born, and he really didn't help matters when he proved everybody right with that sending off against Midtjylland, coming hot on the heels of that sending off against Rangers last season as well. He's a funny one, isn't he? Because I think, like we've spoken about before, he can be as loyal a servant as you like. He can play for the club for as long as he has, and yet these high-profile emotional flashpoints are what he's going to be remembered for. Will you look back on his time at the club fondly, or is he one of those players that will come and go for you?
Sum it up: red card, niggling injury, play a bit, repeat. That's a summation of what Alan was talking about there, isn't it? That's what you remember him for: red card, niggling injuries, plays a bit, usually big games. As I said before, he was a big game player. He was a big game clanger merchant in games. The big games, we've just named a few there: Astana, Rangers, Midtjylland. Yet somehow he's enjoying a renaissance under Ange in probably his most natural position. Mm-hmm. And I've always said, and Alan alluded to it earlier there as well, Nir Bitton's a brilliant passer of a football, but he needs about 15, 20 minutes. Nobody near him to weigh it up. He never moves it quickly. It's always very slow and laborious. Alan will probably be able to tell you that more than I, but he can pass a football. He's got an eye for a pass, and for the height that he is, I always thought he should be a bigger, imposing footballer, especially at both centre half and in the midfield. I prefer him in midfield because he's away from danger. The further away he is from his own goal, the better, in my opinion. But the last couple of games, and again, I think this is down to Ange's man management. He's clearly detailed Bitton to do things, and against Ferencváros and against Dundee, he's been pretty good, right? I'll give him praise where it's due. I haven't given him a wee bit of a doing there, But that's the Bitton that we all thought, we all know is in there. But my goodness, you talk about a guy, 9 years, 16 trophies, and you would be struggling to remember any real contribution you made to those 16 winners' medals, wouldn't you? Is that being harsh? But it's true, Alan, isn't it? You can't pick out a final and say Nir Bitton was brilliant, or he did this, or a moment in any of those medal-winning, trophy-laden career that he's had at Celtic, and you say Bitton made the difference there, or Bitton did this and that. So that's my conundrum with Bitton, because I think there's a footballer there in flashes, and it has only been in flashes. But the tendency, as you say, has been that people will remember Astana. They'll remember the red card against Rangers. They'll remember the red card against Midtjylland. They'll remember the niggling injuries. And it's a shame, because I'd like to have seen Bitton maybe used in the centre midfield role with better players round about him. And I think it's kind of prescient that he's playing better because he has quality players round about him. Yeah.
I don't disagree with your perspective on, and I was with you. I was stretching back to think, when did Bitton play like a starring role in a cup final, or at least up there for man of the match in a cup final, or when did he dig us out of a hole away at Hearts when we needed to get a point or something to stay in the? I can't think too many. But then you see, part of the reason that I did the whole Celtic by numbers thing was to not just think about the moments, but actually to try and understand what a player was contributing in all of the time that they're on the pitch.
Sure.
And if I were to summarise him on that, and if you look at his defensive performances, he's actually, again, a bit like Bain. Actually, if you were to score him using the key metrics as a central defender, he would actually be in the cadre that we would consider to be average, good enough, did okay at defending. The problem was that his error rate is up there closer to Effie Ambrose. That's the problem. So look at you have to look at the kind of two things in tandem.
And that skews your perception, doesn't it? That skews your perception of him.
Yeah, it does. It does, because that's the thing that people remember. They don't remember the 11 line-breaking passes that you'll average in every game. They'll remember the one error every 2 games or 3 games. That's the nature of football fans. But I'm trying to provide a balance. What he does offer that is probably his one elite skill, let's say, is that line-breaking ability from deep, his ability to pass the ball through lines, and that is something that is I would say, a hot commodity, really. So I'm trying to give you a balanced view. I mean, I don't think the guy is ever going to be, a first choice, but I think he's 30 years old. He's never going to be like Bain. He's never going to be a bigger club than Celtic. This is the pinnacle of his career. I suspect, like Bain, he'd be somebody that'd be happy to be at Celtic, to accept the role as a squad player, and providing he keeps himself fit, he probably gives decent value. Would be my view.
All right, guys. I was just waiting in the wings because Laura's had a few issues with her tech today, so you're going to have to bear with us for the next 8 minutes, where I will replace Laura in the hot seat. But I've been enjoying your discussions. Martin comes in to say, "Here comes the headmaster." Is that what people think of me? Here comes the headmaster, and Monty reckons he's going to get banned. No, not at all. I would like to throw a few things. I like Alan coming in, Tony, because I do appreciate a different perspective on the data against the observations. So it's like what you were just saying there, Alan, about the things you remember against a lot of the positives, and that is the pivotal errors against all the positives. And I think when I'm looking at Nir Bitton, what I've always liked, and it's maybe a traditional view, is I do like to have a nucleus of people there, in particular through any transitional periods, who have been at the club for a lengthy period of time and who know the club and the expectations and the traditions, and they get the club. And I think that we always think about Forrest and McGregor in that vein, but often not the likes of Bitton or Roderick, who are coming up for their 9th anniversaries at the club, almost a decade there. And I posted a series of images after we spoke to Willie McStay last week. I put something out on Twitter, and it was basically, if you look at Willie McStay being signed by Sean Fallon, and then you go back to where Sean Fallon sits in the history of Celtic, well, he was signed by Jimmy McGrory. And then you could even go further back then and say, who signed Jimmy McGrory? You're going back to our very first manager. But then you go from Willie McStay signing John Kennedy and McManus, and then Ange Postecoglou getting his Manager of the Month award, flanked by McManus and Kennedy. And I've always felt that's an important tradition at Celtic. Tony, what's your thoughts on that kind of boot room mentality? And it's a wee bit kind of looser based on what I was saying there about Bitton, having had almost a decade at the club. That bloodline, if you like, from, the traditions of Celtic right through to the modern day. Because I know that Kennedy, and Strachan in particular, but Kennedy's had quite a hard time from a section of the Celtic support due to his involvement in last season's, downfall.
Well, I'll tell you what was interesting about the Manager of the Month award. Ange got the award, but he made sure all his background boys were in the photo.
Mm-hmm.
There was none of Ange holding it himself. And he also made a point of saying, this isn't anything that I'm doing that's magical. It's everybody. So I was quite impressed by that, and the fact that Kennedy and Strachan have been whipping boys from the Celtic support. What do they do? What do they contribute? They clearly contribute, because Ange made a point of saying, get all these guys in the photo. and saying, this isn't down to me, this is down to the whole team, the medical team, everybody. And he said he also made a point of challenging everybody from the Aberdeen game onwards, October. He challenged everybody to have the perfect month if they could. And he, not just the players, he meant everybody, the backroom staff, the medical staff, everybody. And obviously the Livingston game apart, they're a draw away from, a win against Livingston away from the perfect month. So he made a point of saying all these things. And I think you're right, these things are important, that you recognise what people or everybody at Celtic is bringing to the table right now. And I might have been harsh on Bitton there, but he's just not my kind of footballer. But I think in terms of guys coming into the club, Bitton and Rogic are go-tos then, aren't they, McGregor? Because they've been there the longest. So they obviously bring some quality there. Gordon Strachan used to bang on about it, that he's a good teammate. I never understood what that meant. I understand it now. So Bitton clearly does something as well off the park, that Ange clearly likes. And he's starting to do things on the park which Ange likes and the supporters are liking as well. So, again, I think these guys are important, as Alan's just said, they're squad players, they'll play some kind of role. But it is important that you were talking about there, that kind of bloodline and people that you can rely upon. And I was very happy that Ange did that, made a point of saying, because I never saw any pictures of Ange standing with the award himself. He was very clear on that deflected everything away from himself and saying it was a team thing.
Yep.
Gave that great analogy about the house. I'm building a beautiful house. I'm not looking over at the neighbours, that kind of thing, A man clearly tunnel visioned about what's going on, and all his staff, medical staff, background staff, players, everybody's buying into it. So that's why there's a wee bit of harmony at Celtic at this minute in time. Will it last to the end of the season? Who knows? But certainly you can see that they're reaping the benefits of everybody being on the same page.
That harmony is something, again, I would never take for granted after watching last season and what happened there, the spectacle that ensued. When we're talking about Nir Bitton then, Alan, I'm going to come to you on this one. I look at some of the areas of the park where we need to strengthen, and that, I feel, could, depending on James McCarthy's fitness, also be an area that if we do want to go through the whole season and always have someone to call upon, and it's not a 20-year-old untried youngster as it has been this season a couple of times, particularly in the early part. I'm looking at the three players that we've got in McCarthy, Bitton and Soro who fill that role. How happy or satisfied are you with those three, or do you think that come January we'll offload Soro and maybe replace him with a first or second pick in that position?
Entirely dissatisfied. It's the biggest issue we've got by far. Central midfield is the biggest issue. We've got other issues in other parts of the field in terms of squad depth, and left back probably is a concern. But central midfield is a massive problem because none of the players we've got in there, with the exception of probably McGregor, is a natural fit for the style of play that we're actually trying to play, and we're kind of making do at the moment. And we're what is mitigating it to an extent, and we've covered it with Bitton, and we've seen it with Ralston, and to a lesser degree maybe with Rogic, is the restorative powers of Postecoglou. To I think once she likes you and decides that you're part of his gang, he's going to give you the confidence, all the confidence in the world. That's what seems to happen with Ralston and Rogic, and with Bitton. The way Bitton played against Dundee, where he was running down the left wing trying to beat people, when he was running forward with the ball, he was getting more involved in challenges. I think it was against Ferencváros, there was something like a dozen challenges that he won. That is a player who's been given confidence by his manager, and he's playing with more freedom as well. But at the moment, that's covering over a multitude of issues in central midfield. So getting players in who are not only comfortable on the ball and can play the passing, attacking game that Postecoglou wants, but also are athletic in those 8 positions, to me, is absolutely crucial, because I do think, and I'm picking it up in the data, that if you push McGregor forward, you're almost losing a little bit. I think he's the most dynamic 6 that we've got to play that style of football, but essentially he's got 2 number 10s in front of him. Neither of them have got the mobility, the pressing, the defensive pressing capabilities to play the way that Postecoglou wants to play. I think they're improving. I think Turnbull's got a lot of improvement in him, but he's never going to have Ryan Christie's in it. And I'm sorry, I keep going back to Ryan Christie, because Ryan Christie is the model of the sort of player I'd want to see in there. He's never going to have that, that all-round athletic, never stop running type of game. It's just never going to be Turnbull's game. But if you had McGregor and one other of that ilk, that athletic ability, you could probably get away with having then Turnbull or Rogic, but not both of them. And neither McCarthy or Bitton helps that equation in any shape or form from what I've seen.
You know, the big question then, I guess, is looking at it from a kind of observational perspective. I didn't think McCarthy suited Ange Postecoglou's plan. Yeah. For you to come in and also say that, having looked at the data, it doesn't look like he's the type of player that suits Ange's style. Is that a big concern for you, especially when you consider the fact that he's on a fairly hefty contract, 4 years at 30, and we haven't seen much of him, Alan?
I mean, I get the heart thing, and I didn't at the time, and I'm probably being a little bit clever after the event, because he's actually, I think, he performed better than I expected for, and he's also adding a lot more to the team in some of these intangibles, which we can't measure, which, I do tend to downplay sometimes, but are important, and I do accept they're important. But with McCarthy, and I know he's not played many minutes, and I do want him to succeed, like I want every player that's Celtic signed to succeed. I just don't see it. I never have done. I just don't see what he's going to add to the way that we're going to play and develop as a side. If you look at some of the teams like Atalanta, Leipzig, who've got like 18, 19, 20-year-old athletic, quick players in that position, that's the kind of model that would fit the style of football that Postecoglou's trying to play, not 30-year-old players who are dropping back, playing more conservative game because of their age and injury profile. That's just doesn't fit that profile at all.
Interesting times ahead, moving into January for sure. It was nice to have a wee cameo myself. I got the kind of minutes that James McCarthy's been getting there in the last bulletin.
Mikey Johnson, you came on with your nice hair and you danced around for a bit.
I don't know about that.
Your contribution was Nir Bitton-esque, I think.
Bitton-esque. At least I never poked anyone in the eye, Tony. Thanks, everybody, for getting involved in the comment section. I've been trying to get us back on Twitter. Our streaming host doesn't like Twitter at the moment. We've removed it, we've re-added it. But in the meantime, get yourself onto YouTube and watch it there. We will resolve that eventually. And if you're on YouTube, get subscribing. We're giving away free gifts very regularly just for being a subscriber on YouTube. I've enjoyed both watching and appearing on the show today. So all that's left for me to say is Laura Bradburn, Alan Morrison and Tony Haggerty. Thanks for joining us on A Celtic State of Mind.
Cheers.